Hey everyone, happy Tuesday evening. I'm here a week late with an upload. I know I wanted to be consistent with my YouTube videos and I've already fallen behind. I blame myself, of course, and the busyness that is summer break. I'm going to be covering abuse and domestic violence. So, this is a trigger warning for anyone that may not be able to listen to such topics. I want to say that first and foremost because this is my story, and the only way that I know how to tell my story is the real and the authentic way that it happened. I can't embellish things, I can't make things sound less horrible than they really were. So, if you know, domestic violence or abuse in any other kind of way is triggering to you, this may not be the video for you, but next week we'll have something a little bit more lighthearted to listen to. So, to get right into it, I grew up in Burbank, California, as some of you may know. I think I mentioned it in a video or two before this. And I had an older brother when I was in the beginning of elementary school. So I still have an older brother, but at the time, that was my sibling. And we lived in the same home. My mom had a very weird work schedule. She worked 3 to 11, so she was not really home with us. My stepdad actually took care of me when I started school, and that's kind of the earliest memories that I have. When I was in kindergarten, I want to say that it really began for me. So, my older brother was very good friends with the two boys that were our neighbors, our next door neighbors, and they would play all the time. And, being the younger sister, I always wanted to do what my brother was doing, play with who my brother was playing with. Um, I wanted to be just like him. That's very typical of a younger sibling, right? So, my brother was very close with our neighbors, so close, in fact, that every summer, all summer, these kids would spend it together, playing, having a blast, making little videos, recording each other. At the time, uh, the kids and myself also had a really neat relationship. We were pretty close as well. So they had a father that was a little bit older. He was in like his maybe 60s, I want to say, and I'm being generous when I say 60s. When they were little, when I was little enough to remember these events. There was a day where I went next door to play with his sons, and I knocked on the door, and their father answered the door, and I asked if the boys were there. He told me they were. So I walk into the house. Immediately behind me, however, their father had closed and locked the door. In that moment, I knew I was like 7 years old, but I knew something was off, something was wrong. The immediate energy in the room was just different. I actually became like hypersensitive to the noise that was around me and realized there was nobody else in this home. I didn't hear any boys talking in the bedroom. I didn't hear his wife there. I didn't hear anybody. So it was him and myself, and now the door was locked. So I became a bit panicky. I remember freaking out about how was I going to get out of the apartment? Was I going to be able to do it fast enough without him catching me? Kind of a thing. He led me to his bedroom. I remember his big, coarse, disgusting hand holding my little hand, and he led me to his bedroom where he exposed himself. And I was actually disgusted. I remember I made a face, and he got a little bit upset at the fact that I made a face. Because I just thought, like, you know, a 7-year-old has no idea what adult themes are. So to me, for him to just like expose himself with no like warning or anything. It was disgusting to me. So I made a face, and he tried to grab my hand to touch him, and I remember pulling back, but he kind of held my, wrist to have me stay there. And I've never pulled back so hard in my entire life. I pulled back, and I just remember I beelined it for the door. I unlocked that door. I didn't even look behind me to see if he was there. And I just ran home, and I locked my own door because at this moment I was absolutely horrified at what I just seen. Of course, as most victims of sexual abuse, they don't tell someone right away. And I know I didn't personally. I didn't say anything until I was about 13. That was my first encounter. Throughout the years, they would happen quite a few times. Anytime that this man would have me alone at his place, or right before the kids would come home from school, uh, in the summer breaks, he knew what he was doing. And to look back at that time in my life as an adult now is very heartbreaking, because an adult is very aware of the damage that they're inflicting, especially on a young child, when it's purely just for their own, sexual gratification, to act on your impulses, knowing that you are really hurting this child for the rest of their life. You know this, but yet you act on it. And to me, that's unfathomable now that I have my own children. Over the years, I know that there were points in time where I thought I was just crazy and overreacting. There was a lot of points in my life where I would tell my mother about, you know, just my life in general. And she would always say, "Oh, you're so dramatic. You're so this, you're so that." And so when it came to this specific topic, of course I didn't tell her, because I didn't want her to tell me, "You're just dramatic." This was something different. This was something very personal, very sensitive, touchy subject that I didn't really want to cover with her at the time, because I didn't feel like it was a safe space for me to do so. There was an occasion where I was playing with a friend of mine, and I kicked the soccer ball onto the top of the garage over the cars. And I hated trying to get a ball that I had kicked up there, because every time that I'd ask for help, he would show up, and he would kind of lift me in a way that he purposely would, you know, touch me. But then he would pretend like he just hoisted me up and it was no big deal. But it would make me feel very violated and very disgusted with myself. Like, why did I even allow this man to help me? Like, I should have known. There was a lot of guilt, and I should have known throughout the years in dealing with this. This man obviously was sick mentally, but that doesn't excuse the fact that he was an abuser. And I say was because he's passed on now. When I came forward with my abuse story to my mother years ago, I went to the Burbank Police Department. I spoke to a detective. I let them know the various instances that he had touched me or tried to, picking me up to get the ball type situations. There was one in particular that I will never forget. I was outside, and he drove a van. It was a very odd white, like, creepy van. And I was playing by myself soccer outside. I was kicking the ball around to myself. And then he told me that he had something in his van. I can't remember if it was a piece of candy, if it was a toy. He told me he had something. And I walked over there, and he grabbed me by the arm and kind of threw the door closed. And of course, again, I'm thinking, how am I going to get out of this? Like, now what? So I'm laying in this van being completely violated by this disgusting old man. And I almost disassociate. I believe that's what happened because I don't remember too much of what physically happened. I know that the worst possible thing that he could do to me, he finally did. Absolutely 100%. But I almost feel like I wasn't in my body for that moment. Like it was so horrific that I disassociated with myself to be just out of body for that. When I finally squirmed away enough for him to just let me go, I ran inside my home and I just began crying. And after that, I became really a recluse. I didn't want to play with anyone. I didn't want to leave my home. The classic, signs of some type of abuse going on with a child. I no longer played outside after that. I no longer played with the boys next door. I no longer put myself in any situation that I could ever possibly be alone with him, ever, after that. That experience in and of itself was so horrific that today, when I think about it, 32 years old, I think about it and I think, how did I block that out? Like, how am I able to tell this story, get emotional, but almost talk about it like it's someone else? To me, I think that is fascinating. So, of course, when I came forward with my story of being abused by this man, he fled the city. He left. He went to the neighboring town. He went over to Santa Clarita or somewhere in that vicinity and kind of laid low for many years. He ended up moving in with his wife or ex-wife, partner, and then his sons toward the end of his life. And he passed being very sick and old. Does that give me any peace? No, because he didn't sit in a prison and serve time for what he did. I feel like I've served almost a life sentence for what he did, if that makes sense. To me, the pain, the shock, the feeling, nothing is ever really resolved. I'm not healed from that trauma. I get that a lot. People ask me if I feel, well, you must feel some kind of relief because he's not here anymore. He can't hurt anyone else. During the point in time in which the police were trying to find him, that was the one thing that was on my mind, which was he's probably out there doing this to somebody else. And today I will never know if there are any other victims. I just know that it was me, but I also know that this man could not control his impulses with children. So in the back of my mind, I kind of feel like there has to be other victims because of how easily I was targeted, because of how easily he picked me out. I live with seeing those horrific mental pictures on a daily basis. It almost got worse when I started having kids because I have a daughter myself and she's about that age. And when I say that a mother's love, a mother's protection. The way that I'm a little bit overprotective with my kids is something that I'm not ashamed to say, because as I was growing up, I didn't really have supervision. I know that my stepdad was there and my mom was at work, but I didn't really have somebody looking at me, making sure that I'm, at home, and it was kind of a free for all. So that's kind of how I was in these wild situations. There was no adult looking, caring at what I was doing. So that trauma happened, and then I move into elementary school, and I'm trying to heal from that. My mom meets this man at her job. She was working at a high school, and I remember the first time that she brought him to the house. I met him, and he wasn't necessarily friendly. He was very standoffish, and he was like that to my older brother as well. And my oldest brother must have had some kind of gut feeling about him. I'm not sure, because he didn't like him off the bat. He was never a fan of this man, but as the story goes on, you will understand why. So by the time my mother met her boyfriend, I was very withdrawn. I was a very antisocial, very angry young girl, trying to deal with the demons that I had just dealt with only a couple of years prior to this time. As her relationship with my younger brother's dad kind of progressed, he began to show his true colors as the years went on. And he was a very physically, mentally, emotionally abusive man. I say physically because I'd seen him punch my mom. I had seen her try to, defend herself a couple of times, but not nearly as many times as I've seen him throw punches at her. Life became very chaotic when he entered the picture, to say the least. Once my mom had let me know that she was having a baby, I knew that this man was going to be here for a while. I knew that it wasn't just a boyfriend that was going to pass in the wind, that he was going to be around for a while. I don't know how I know that, but I knew that. She has my brother, and of course, my little brother. I still think of him as a baby. He's 26 today, but I still think of him as that annoying little brother that used to terrorize my little sleepovers and, be silly and stay up with me until 12, and we'd get in trouble. When he was born, into ages 1, 2, and 3 was when it was really chaotic. Her boyfriend was over the house every day. He would spend the night all the time. It was almost like he lived with us, but without living with us. At the time, I didn't know what the dynamic was, why he was over all the time, and then he would be gone. It turns out he was married. So that's a whole nother fun, addition to the cake of chaos that was happening there. This man also was not right in his mind for several reasons as well. But I remember being in school, and I was just at that age where I wanted my mom to be a part of my school life. I wanted her to see my school work. I wanted her to see how I was progressing, see my grades, meet my teacher, do the back to school nights, do the everything. One year I asked her to come to a back to school night, and she came, but she brought him. And this was the first instance of chaos that I would experience with the two of them. So she agreed to come, and he met us there. It was a complete shock to me that he was going, because I thought this is a me and you experience. Why is he here? But I wasn't the type of child to really complain, especially at this point. I was just glad that she was there. We get there, I'm showing her around the classroom, but at the same time, I noticed that he's got his hand on her hand, like over it, like this. He's got his hand on a firm grip over hers, and he's kind of mumbling something and leading her out of the room. And I remember following her, being like, Mom, but you didn't see this. You didn't see this. I wanted to show you. He let her out, and they started an argument. He started an argument. He started to call her names, cuss at her, accuse her of cheating. This was his thing. He always accused my mom of cheating. Kind of funny when he had a wife at home. So he started that at the school in front of the other kids. And that was the first time that I was actually mortified that this was happening. I didn't know that he was capable of doing something like this because this was the first instance of many. So we got home from the back to school night. Then he started to go in on really physically abusing her right in front of me. My brother was, I want to say 1 or 2 at the time. And I remember having to grab his hand and just go to the restroom because the restroom was the only room in my home that had a lock on it. And I knew that if we were locked in there, nobody was going to be able to get to us, to hurt us. Him, more importantly, because he was a baby to me, right? I wanted to protect him and keep him safe and make him feel safe because I knew what was happening outside of the door was extremely horrific. And you could hear glass shattering. You could hear stuff falling. You could hear him pushing her into the wall. She's screaming at him to stop. She's, trying to call the police. And he's just not stopping. And as soon as this noise was silent, I came out with my brother and he was gone. He left. And that was the only type of peace that I ever had, was when I knew that he wasn't at the house. There was never really a feeling of I'm at peace because I'm at home. It was always a feeling of I'm at home. When is the next thing going to happen, and how can I get out of here the fastest if I need to? I never felt a sense of I'm safe here. When summers would roll around, my mom would want to go to Las Vegas or the Grand Canyon we went to one year. She'd pick a random place she'd want to go to with my little brother and myself, but then she knew that I wasn't a fan of this man already, just by, that one experience. She would have him meet us on the way there, so I wouldn't complain the entire time, basically. And whenever I saw him, when I thought, okay, I'm secure, I'm safe, we're going to have a trip, my mom and my brother, we're going to have this bonding time, and I would see him and my whole just excitement for everything would just die. Because I'm like, this is going to be a freaking nightmare, and now I'm in another state. I don't know anyone there. How am I going to save myself? How is anyone going to save me from this? In Las Vegas in particular, I know that my mom liked to gamble, so one day we were actually at Circus where she promised me that we would be able to play the arcade games and it was going to be fun. That happened to not be the case. Like, this is not news. My mom loved to embellish things when I was younger. She liked to make things seem like they were going to be really fun, but they didn't turn out to be so fun. us going to Circus really turned into just me and my little brother being on that second balcony, and we would just watch her and her boyfriend move from slot machine to slot machine. And I would see these other families with their kids having fun at the games, and I always wondered what that was like to have a mom that really cared that you were having fun. I would see these families having so much fun. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're going down to see the little circus show, and they're having a great time. And the kid has this big cotton candy and popcorn, and the parents just gleaming because their kid's having a great time. I always wondered what that must feel like on both ends, as the child, but also as the parent. I would be envious of. I know that that child goes home and they probably are in a safe environment. They can probably go to bed peacefully, knowing that everything is okay and that their parents care about them and their parents are going to keep them safe. My story was very different, obviously. This particular time in Las Vegas, when she was done gambling, she came up. I did maybe a game or so. Of course, my little brother was like 2, so he didn't care. And I always dreaded nightfall because that's when this guy would completely act wild. It was like he turned into a werewolf. When the sun went down, you didn't know what to expect from him, really. You didn't know if it was going to be a decent night or the worst night ever. You could never tell. So we got back to the hotel room at this time, and as soon as that door closed, he started an argument with her, and it was nothing out of the ordinary. I kind of sat on the second bed right next to my little brother, and I just kind of pretended that I wasn't paying attention to what they were doing. They started arguing. He threw something at her, and they started to go at it with each other, yelling, screaming. He threw the first punch, and I knew immediately to take my little brother to the bathroom and lock the door. So we were safe. And I remember grabbing my little brother's face, his little tiny face, and I would tell him that he was safe and that nothing was going to happen to him. And I think I did that just out of, I want to say, because nobody had ever told me, ever, that I was safe and that everything was going to be okay. So I wanted to make sure that I did that for him so that he felt like he was safe and that everything was going to be okay. I remember that specific night, he was just a monster. I don't know if he was drinking or what, but they actually ended up at the door of the bathroom. And I remember seeing that door, try to open. I don't know if he tried to open it or my mom did, but it was locked. And I just was there locked with my little brother in my arms. And they were throwing punches at the door. My mom fell and hit the door. I could see there was a little gap, and I could see her hair where she fell, right in front of it. And I had my brother turned facing me, facing the wall, so he didn't see anything. And he had no knowledge of what was happening. He just knew that the room was loud, and we were there in the bathroom. When we would get home from vacations like these, this was an every year thing. Every time we'd go to Las Vegas, it was horrific. We went to the Grand Canyon, it was the same thing. He started an argument in the hotel room, and I would always be putting myself in charge of making sure that my brother was okay and kind of shielding him from that abuse, being almost the adult in a situation where I was still the child. So, school would start back up again, but it seemed like every time her boyfriend could level up in weirdness, in viciousness, he would do it. There was a point where he started to break into our house instead of just stay there all day. So that's when things really became unhinged. My brothers, both of my older brothers, kind of felt like they needed to be almost watch guards at my home. It was only a one bedroom place, a one bedroom tiny apartment. And I remember having my older brother sleep on the couch. And I always thought it was weird that he was sleeping there for like a week straight. And I felt a little bit safe. There was no, break ins or anything for that entire week that my brother was there. It was the most peaceful week that I can remember in a long time. And as soon as he went back to living with his girlfriend, he came back and started breaking into the house sporadically. You never knew when he was going to come. And that's the reality of it. I lived in fear of what he would do to my mom because I saw what he was capable of doing. And I felt like I was more worried about her safety than she was. I was more worried that she wouldn't live to see the end of that relationship than she was. And that kind of broke my heart. But it also made me really angry with her. And when he would start screaming and, doing his thing in front of me and my little brother, I used to think, why don't you have a backbone? Why can't you just defend yourself? Defend your kids for just one time? Why is it so hard for you? Why do you let this man talk to you like trash in front of your kids? This is not okay. Even at that young age, I knew that this was not normal. Not everybody went home to this kind of environment. It was crazy. It was wild. It was just chaotic all the time. One particular instance where he broke in, and it was pretty horrific. This was the one time that I asked my mom to sleep with me, and she actually did. She usually did not. I don't know if that's because she anticipated the fact that he would break in and, she would catch him before he'd scare us or something. I don't know. She always slept on the couch. Well, this one night she slept with me in my bed, and my little brother was in his bed right next to me. And as soon as I started to doze off and fall asleep, the wooden door to that bedroom flew open. I mean, it was silence, and the door flew open with such force I cannot even explain how horrified I was. I thought it was a burglar, like somebody else. As soon as I saw the silhouette in the hallway, I knew it was him immediately. There was no mistaking it. Just his aura. It was like you could sense when evil was around, is the best way that I can describe it. He stormed into the room, and you have to think there are two sleeping children, or what is believed to be two sleeping children in here, and you're barging in here with the force of 1,000 suns, like at 3:00 in the morning. Now I think it's wild, but back then this guy wasn't in his right mind. I don't think ever. He stormed in and he grabbed my mom right at the crown of her head, like right here by the hair. And he grabbed her and really dragged her out of the bed. And I remember her grabbing her scalp right there and just kicking and telling him to stop. And, he was going to wake up me and my brother. And I'm a light sleeper, so I was already awake witnessing the whole thing, but I played like I was asleep. In reality, who could sleep through something like that? It was wildly loud. I think my little brother did sleep through it though, but again, he was 2, so of course. I remember feeling so helpless at the time because he dragged her out of the bedroom. I didn't feel like I could get up and go after her because then he would know that I was awake. And I felt like if he knew I was awake, he would hurt me as well. So I went to the hallway and I listened, and I I sat there and I listened to their arguments, their fights, because I wanted to know if there was ever a real serious point where I needed to call police, or I needed to go to a neighbor's house, or I needed to get out and get some help. I always was, as much as it was horrifying to hear, I always wanted to be at the door or be in the hallway to hear exactly what was happening, because I always wanted to make sure still that my mom was okay, that she got out of the argument and the physical fight that they would get into. A couple years after that, he kind of fizzled out. He wasn't around much anymore as my little brother grew up. And that's when I really started to look inward and started to realize this path that my mother was on, that was just violence and chaos and more chaos behind it, was not something that I wanted to live as I became an adult myself. I always knew, even as I was going through it, that I would not ever put my children through what I had endured at either time in my life. Whether it be the sexual abuse because of the lack of just parent being there or caring what was happening, or whether it was the physical abuse with the relationship. I always had promised myself that I would never allow my kids to live in that, to witness that. It was a complete nightmare. And to be honest, if I could go back and change it, I almost wouldn't, because it made me hyper aware of that behavior and how wrong it is. People that don't grow up like that and see that firsthand don't always grow up realizing how chaotic that is for kids, how chaotic it is for them as adults. They don't always see that. But I did. And so in a way, I wouldn't take it back, because it really opened my eyes to what not to do as a young adult, as an adult, as somebody who would be married someday. I knew very early on what I was not going to put up with from a man, from anybody, because I watched my mom kind of be a doormat for so many years. It shaped the way that I viewed relationships in general, because when I became interested in dating in my early 20s, if there was any kind of red flag, if somebody had any kind of temper, I was out of there super fast. Without an explanation, I was just gone, blocked the phone number, done. The violence aspect, the abusive aspect of somebody's character, I just couldn't. I promised myself that I would never put up with that, and I have stayed true to my promise to myself. In becoming a parent, it's kind of been a little bit of a blessing in disguise almost, because I'm seeing life through my kids' eyes, almost like a fresh start. I really go out of my way to make it a point to tell my daughter every day when she goes to bed that she's safe and mom is here. And I do that out of habit, of course, because I used to do it with my brother, but I do it with my daughter now. I always let her know that she's safe and that I'm here, and she's always protected in the home. I always let her know how much she's loved, how much she's cared about. And it's something that I do consciously, because nobody ever sat me down and told me, you're safe and you're loved and you're cared about. I never had pep talks like, I love you and you're loved. The comments that I would get from my mom were very like critical. When I was a teenager and I had acne, she would say, like, oh, you need to put some makeup on. Or when I was pregnant with my daughter, for example, and I was throwing up, I had very bad morning sickness, very bad hyperemesis for 6 months of that pregnancy. She would tell me, you need to put on some makeup or your husband's going to leave you. My mom grew up in a different day and time, so she obviously put up with things very differently than I do. I have a very short fuse when it comes to things like that. I would never put up with abuse at all in any shape or form, whether it be mental, physical, absolutely not. To this day, I'm hyper aware of it now. But the nice thing about it is that my husband is very much the opposite of any man that I'd ever encountered as a child. And I think I did that on purpose. I curated my life right now, as it is, to be almost the opposite of the environment that I grew up in. The environment that I grew up in was very chaotic. It was not loving. It was not safe. It was not anything that it should have been, that we deserved as kids. The environment I have for my children today is safe, is loving. They know that they're loved. They know that they have a mom and a dad that cares about them, that loves them. They know that they have a safe home. They know that they're safe in their beds at night when they go to sleep. Personally, I've seen how difficult it is for some women to leave relationships like this. And if my story can help anyone out there that is struggling with this topic, or anyone's that I've covered throughout this video, if anyone's out there struggling with domestic violence or sexual abuse, number one, you're not alone. Number two, I definitely recommend looking into resources, because I know there's a hotline. I'm going to put the phone number in the description of this video, just so it's there. If there's anyone out there watching this that finds themselves in a situation that's like, I'm living something very similar to that, I want you to know that there are resources out there for you, that your life means more than to live in fear all the time. Life is actually really beautiful when you get out of these cycles of abuse and trauma. It can have really beautiful moments. But first come the hard things, like walking away or leaving a relationship that's very dangerous. That's a very hard thing. And I definitely can sympathize with people that are in that situation. I saw it myself. My mom never left that relationship. He did. So the chaos left with him. But by that time, I was like in junior high school. It was a reign of years of just abuse, chaos, no peace. And to be honest, to this day, I don't think that I would have it any other way, because it did teach me a lot about life. It taught me a lot about relationships, and it taught me a lot about what I deserve and what I don't deserve. And it's almost the gift that keeps on giving, in the way that I will be able to teach my daughter what she shouldn't put up with, what she deserves, and what she doesn't deserve as well. So for generations, it'll go. My experiences will live on through my stories. But I wanted to come on here and share my story with all of you guys. Thank you all for subscribing to the channel. I know that I'm just now coming back and getting it off the ground, But I'm really thankful to all of you for being here, for watching, for subscribing, especially because I dropped this video a week after I was supposed to. I thank you guys so much for sticking with me. And all of our journeys are different, and I feel like that's very evident in this video. But I'm just very grateful for every view, every new subscriber. I'm always taking count of when I get a new one, and it's always something to celebrate. So thank you all for subscribing to the channel and being supportive and watching and liking. I really appreciate all the support and love. And again, I'm going to put the hotline number in the description box below. And until next week, I will see you guys on Wednesday as scheduled.